Welcome to Truth Africa series, Unapologetic and Truthful. I am your host, Yemi Melekaya. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's a renowned Nigerian author and speaker whose impact on literature and feminism has been nothing short of transformative.
African literature, does it have meaning for you?
Comme ça pour faire des guillemets. African writing, yes, and I think of myself as coming from a tradition of African writing. I think I'm here today because of the people who came before me. I'm here today because Chinua Achebe wrote, and Flora Mwapa wrote, and Ahmed Ataidu wrote, and Muthoni Lekimani wrote, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote. I think of myself as coming from a tradition. But I also, the reason that I sometimes worry about labels like that is that, for me, it's not so much the labels as it is the value that we give to them. So sometimes when something is labeled African literature, I start to worry because I think what is important for me, it's imperative that we give African literature the same value that we give literature from any other part of the world. That we don't see it as, sometimes I think that, so there have been times when I've been asked, are you an African writer? And especially when I'm in a bad mood, I say no. And the reason, when I haven't slept well, the reason I say no is that I sometimes think that that label, it's not because I'm ashamed, or because if I were to be born again, I want to be born an African. I'm deeply happy to come from this wonderful place. But I think in literary circles, there is often the tendency to read African literature and African writers not so much as literature as anthropology, that we're supposed to kind of explain something native and deep and primitive. And many people in Africa just, they're women who just want to get the best hair cream, right? But somehow, everything is supposed to have a kind of great noble weight about the suffering of the people. And so when I push back at labels like that, it's because of that. It's not that I realize, of course, that there's a wonderful tradition of African writing, and I'm very proud because I'm from that tradition. But I'm not sure that I would be very enthusiastic about that label becoming overly mainstream. I think African writers write books, they write literature.
And Chimamanda, you have two countries, two homes, two cultures, at least. And you also have several languages in your novels. Your novels, you write in English, the official language in Nigeria. But there are also the languages spoken in Nigeria. Igbo, Yoruba, I hope I'm pronouncing this properly. And is it that wealth you grew up in which makes you want to write with everything you have inside yourself?
I don't know. I speak only two languages, sadly. I wish I spoke more, but and I grew up in Igbo land, so I grew up surrounded by Igbo speakers, and I grew up surrounded by Igbo culture, and I grew up in a university community, so it was very progressive and very English speaking, but it was also rooted in Igbo cultural norms, and I think those have shaped me. I think that there is a sense in which my sensibility is Nigerian, particularly, but it's also Igbo. There's certain things that are particularly Igbo, and it's having been raised in southeastern Nigeria, where Igbo culture was kind of the norm. You went to the market and people just spoke Igbo to you automatically, and you absorb these ideas, things like respect for elders, and of course there's a lot I quarrel with. There's a lot about Igbo culture that I want to change, that I want to push back on, and they're mostly things that I think are oppressive to women. But in a large sense, I think my Igbo sensibility has shaped my storytelling. and even the use of language. I write in English because I was educated in English, and I can't really write. I mean, I can write Igbo, but I can't make an argument in Igbo because I don't have the skills. But there is a sensibility from having been raised in an Igbo culture that I think shapes the way I tell my stories. Sensibility from having been raised in an Igbo culture that I think shapes the way I tell my stories.
And do people read your books in Nigeria?
They do, shockingly. They do.
Est-ce qu'il y a des librairies?
Are there bookshops in Nigeria?
Je vois, mais c'est précisément parce que ça vous fait...
Yes, it's about it differently, and that is why I'm saying, are there bookshops? Of course, I imagine there are. But I could ask the question to the French. Do people read in France? I think less and less so.
You know, I think it reflects very poorly on French people that you have to ask me that question. I really do. Because, I mean, because I think surely, I mean, it's 2000, you know, I mean, come on. My books are read in Nigeria. They are they're studied in schools, actually not just Nigeria, across the continent of Africa. And it means a lot to me because obviously I'm very grateful to be read everywhere in the world, but there's something about being read by the people about whom you write. And some of my writing, there are people who sort of made stage plays of some of the stories in Nigeria. When I wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, I remember doing my first event in Lagos, and it was a full house, and it suddenly turned into people just arguing about history. And I sat back and I just enjoyed it. So people were throwing words at each other. And for me, what was wonderful was that literature had made this happen, that because of this contested part of our history, people had read this book, and suddenly they were talking about it and they were disagreeing. But the point is that we're having a conversation, and that conversation had been prompted by literature. And so I felt hopeful about it.
Donc on prend la dernière question qui venait.
So the very last question, you saw there was a man's hand going up. Yes, indeed, it is a man.
Thank you very much. First, really thank you for the wonderful time I had listening to you tonight. It was really nice. Thank you. And I wanted just to ask you, we are in the French diplomacy headquarters. What do you think? What is your opinion as an intellectual, as an intellectual, on French diplomacy and French place in the world? So, just your opinion.
I think in general that France doesn't seem to realize that it is no longer an 18th century world power. And I say this with sad honesty because I have affection for. Oh, the minister left. Oh, okay, good. But I mean, I think that the French. So I'm Anglophone African. I'm not Francophone, but I think that French, the history of French and Francophone relations, I find very vexed and troubling. I think it's interesting, this idea that the CFA, the Francophone currency, is somehow tied to the French franc. I find that really retrograde. I think that the way that there's a kind of cultural power that France wields over Francophone Africa that I think is unhealthy. I think Francophone films are really French films in a way that that's not the case in Anglophone West Africa. There is a kind of, I think the way that Anglophone Africans occupy their space in the UK is not the same way that Francophone Africans occupy their space in France. And I think that Francophone Africans who know this, right? And maybe they should be the ones answering this question, because I know I read a bit about it, but I obviously I don't have a personal experience. But I also think that France has France has sort of a star president, the sort of French answer to Barack Obama, only not as tall, but so maybe that's a good thing for France. I think that there are people who probably wouldn't have cared about France, but because France sort of has this new president who seems interesting and shiny, people are a bit more interested in France. But I should say that my criticism when I started out, and I stand by it, it's because I've had many unpleasant experiences with French immigration. Yesterday was different because they were actually polite, but every time I have come into France, and it's happened, I'm going to say 4 or 5 times in the past 2 years, there is a kind of contempt with which I am dealt with when I present my Nigerian passport that I really find indefensible. And I think it's important because the immigration officers are the first line of contact with a country, and so it shapes the way you think of a country. And I think it takes very little to be polite and to give people their basic dignity. And if I'm coming into a country and I have everything I need and I am legally there, then surely there's no reason to keep me for 30 minutes asking me ridiculous questions, ignoring me for long periods, and just being an ass. So that's what has shaped my irritation with I think it's important to remember that all human beings really deserve equal dignity. It shouldn't depend on the passport that we carry.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, born on September 15, 1977, is a Nigerian author and speaker whose impact on literature and feminism has been nothing short of transformative. Adichie was born and raised in Nigeria, a country that would become a significant backdrop for her literary work. She began her education in Nigeria and later pursued studies in communication and political science in the United States. Adichie burst onto the literary scene with her debut novel, Purple Hibiscus, 2003, a powerful exploration of family dynamics, religion, and the complexity of post-colonial Nigeria. This novel marked the beginning of a literary journey that will captivate readers worldwide. Her second novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, 2006, is a masterpiece that won the Orange Prize for Fiction. Set against the backdrop of the Nigerian Civil War, the novel offers a poignant narrative that explores love, lust, and the impact of historical events on personal lives. In addition to her novels, Adichie is renowned for her essays and speeches on feminism. Her TEDx talk, We Should All Be Feminists, became a viral sensation and later evolved into a book of the same title. In it, she eloquently addresses the need for gender equality, changing societal norms and expectations. Chimamanda Adichie has become a leading voice in contemporary feminism. Through her works and advocacy, she continues to challenge stereotypes, champions inclusivity, and inspire a new generation of feminists to assert their voices and demand equality. With an impressive body of work that includes novel, short stories, and essays, Adichie's impact on literature is undeniable. Her storytelling, rich in cultural nuance and social commentary, has elevated the narrative of African literatures on the global stage. And there you have it, guys. Kindly share your opinion in the comment box below, and do not forget to like this video so YouTube can share this video with more people like you. Until next time, cheers and have a good one.